told you before, I didn't want you to read this crap. I never saw such rotten crap in my life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special audio commentary track for the movie Creepshow. My name is Michael Felsher. I own and operate Red Shirt Pictures, which produces a lot of documentaries, featurettes, and commentary tracks for a wide variety of DVD and Blu-ray releases, mostly horror and cult related. And one of the projects that was very near and dear to my heart that I got to work on was a 2007 special edition release of Creepshow, and it was released in the UK. And for that, I got to do a commentary with George Romero and Tom Savini, pulled together deleted scenes, some behind-the-scenes footage, and most significantly, a documentary called Just Desserts, The Making of Creepshow, which ended up being not quite as long as Creepshow itself, but feature-length in its own right, and had a wide variety of interviews from well over a dozen members of the cast and crew. And if you're listening to this, you're hearing what is now a commentary track being recorded several years after that documentary was completed for a Blu-ray release of Creepshow that is taking place in the UK. And for this track, I wanted to do something a little bit different than some of the other commentary tracks you may have heard. What I wanted to do was go back and get some interviews with some people from the cast and crew of the film who were not available to me when I did the documentary back in 2007. Some of these people just I couldn't get a hold of back then, or were busy on other projects, or for one reason or another just weren't available. And they all had very significant contributions to the film, and I wanted to see what we could do to, get their stories recorded without necessarily going back and re-editing the documentary, doing anything like that. So we're going to have here some standalone interviews that I conducted with each of these people, and I hope that you enjoy some of their memories of the making of this very interesting and classic horror anthology. Our first interview is with Michael Gornick, who was the director of photography for Creepshow. I'm sure many of you listeners will also recognize his name as the director of photography for many of George Romero's other classic films, including Martin, Dawn of the Dead, Night Riders, and Day of the Dead. Mr. Gornick also went on to direct episodes of the television shows Monsters and Tales from the Dark Side, as well as Creepshow 2, which was released in 1987. Michael, the first thing I wanted to ask you about was, when you heard about Creepshow, how excited were you by the potential of this project, considering that it was really 6 short films in one, if you include the wraparound, and you were getting to tackle the EC Comics look and style. What did you think of the project when you first heard about it?
Oh, very, very excited. Well, I didn't grow up exactly in that era of the EC Comics. I knew them very well, and they were kind of hand-me-downs that I had received like in the 60s. From some older influential people in my life. And when he mentioned what he was doing in conjunction with Steve King, I was thrilled. It seemed like just the perfect project for us, for George in particular. He was to execute the screenplays. We had friends in the same building at Fort Pitt Boulevard in Pittsburgh that were animators, so we knew that, wow, we could do wraparounds with them in terms of the animation and the creep, and so it was like a glorious event, yeah.
I would have to imagine that this was an extremely difficult project for you to plan as a cinematographer, because not only do you have multiple stories that you have to deal with, you have very interesting and unique camera angles, you have very complicated lighting effects that were being done in camera, you had all sorts of special effects to deal with, you had multiple sets. It must have been an extremely difficult project in many ways, just to plan out and figure how you were going to make it work on such a low budget. Did you storyboard a lot of the sequences in advance?
We did some storyboards, again, through our friends at the animators, Rick Catazone. We did a lot of on-set, boards for us to discuss and look at. We were so innocent then because we weren't thinking about opticals and green screens, and we wanted to do it live for the emotion, for the method of just the performance itself. And so, we did a lot of prep. I would have to say that a lot of those scenes and the preparation for those scenes, not just the studio stuff, probably took the better part of a year, along with George's preparation for the script. So luckily, being a small little company, basically maybe a 3 to 4 man operation at the time, we could offer that kind of care for the project.
So going right into it with Father's Day, which is the first of the 5 stories, you have what would seem to be not that complex a tale to tell with this one in comparison to some of the others, but you are dealing with makeup effects, you're dealing with a guy coming up out of the ground, you've got the lighting effects that I previously mentioned, and you're also dealing with an exterior location, which was a really nice mansion up in the Fox Chapel area of Pittsburgh. Did that location present any unique challenges to you as far as the filming was concerned?
Not so much the physical nature of the grounds themselves, but some of the nighttime material when Father Nathan Grantham was coming out of the ground. A lot of that proposed difficult times for us because, again, they were practical. We had no effects per se that were going to be in post. So we literally built, a kind of coffin for John Amplis to emerge out of. There was some testing, but we were concerned about his safety. Lighting was somewhat difficult there because we're trying to maintain, some sort of decorum at this Abbott residence without overlighting the area. So we were trying to control ourselves. But that scene in particular is probably the most challenging. That evening graveyard scene with Father.
One of the most distinctive aspects of this film is the way it captures the comic book lighting and the sort of colorful, shocking backgrounds during some of the more intense scenes, and you see quite a few of them in Father's Day. How were those particular effects accomplished? Because, of course, this was 1981, way before the age of CGI, and everything was done pretty much in-camera, practical, on the set. How were those lighting effects created and those backgrounds lit?
Most of them were scrim shots that were multi-layers of effects, scrims that we created both through lighting and sometimes through actual patterns, okay? The foremost screen was kind of translucent, so we would experiment with gels against those scrims and background patterns. Sometimes spent days showing George some alternate patterns, some possibilities, effects in terms of foreground objects, the actors. So we did all this testing, and most of that was controlled 10 by 10 scrims that, again, had patterns and different colored gels behind those.
On Father's Day, again, this was the first film that George had done which really utilized a lot of sort of Hollywood talent, a lot of actors from LA, and a lot of actually some some veterans of the stage, and one in particular that makes a big impression for me on Father's Day is Vivica Lindfors.
Yes.
What are your memories of Vivica?
Lovely actress, wonderful to work with. There were moments where we were so entranced by her performance that George told me, when you run out of film, let's keep rolling because it's so precious. Let's just witness what she's going through. So many of her scenes, we got our material, and then we got our own self-satisfaction in just watching her perform.
Really? Well, that's cool. And then at the same time, you have someone like Vivica Lindfors, who by then was already an established. You had Ed Harris, who you just worked with on Night Riders, and coming in to do this little part. What was it like? And Ed has a very memorable, really goofy dance in that segment. What was it like working with Ed for the few days you had him on that?
He's charming as hell. I mean, and after his performance in Night Riders, we were so grateful for what he had given us there. To have him back, it was like having like an old friend back on set with us, And he's so giving. He's so unpretentious. He's always ready. He's a consummate actor. So it was both fun and a privilege.
The next segment was, and it's interesting, it's all set bound and it's very stylized, was Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill with Stephen King. Essentially a one character piece with the exception of Bingo O'Malley, who shows up in every other part that you see in that. It's, for me, I mean, the Cletus Anderson set is just amazing in this.
Incredible.
It's just
so
vivid and it looks so lived in, yet at the same time so very much of a kind of a Hollywood comic book set. What was it like working on that set? What were the challenges with all the encroaching weeds that had to appear at various points? Did you have to shoot that largely in sequence?
We shot in sequence. We did no sort of time lapse. We literally would stop and go, and Cletus and his crew did an amazing job of continually dressing up, and creating that advance of the plant life. So it was incredible. We shot many long hours, but most of the duty was done by Cletus and his gang. I mean, I got to tell you, it was an incredible job on their part.
The Stephen King, of course, had not really acted before, done anything, but he got a lot of criticism for that performance for some reason. But I think he's hilarious.
I think he's just right.
What are your memories of Stephen?
I mean, obviously he was a little self-conscious. I remember George comforting him quite often and working him through the role. But I found in the final analysis he's very believable from my standpoint, and he's just right. I think he's pretentious because he's Stephen King, and so you're expecting what? But I think if you remove that veil of who is this man, and you watch him as an actor, as the Geordie Verrill, it's an incredible performance. He did a great job. Great job.
Were any of the stories, did you style any of the stories off of any particular influences or any films you'd seen? Or was it all just sort of stuff that was coming off of what King had written, what George was going over with you?
What George had transformed from the King writings, and then we obviously, all of us, Stephen included, were influenced by the EC comics, and so that became kind of our guidepost for how things should look and how things should advance, and the morality of all the sin and retribution of all the stories. They were there, and visually that was the biggest impact that I looked to make, was to somehow replicate those.
As a cinematographer, were you ever concerned about going, was this too theatrical? Was this too over the top? It's almost like, is this even going to work? Were you ever concerned about that?
Never. And I assumed that because people knew how we were advancing this from the comic books, we had some literal material, which were the wraparounds, which announced where they were coming from, that I never was concerned about that. And I hope I never encountered anyone who was confused or was unaware of where we were going with that. Yeah.
In terms of exterior work, I think the third story, Something That Tied You Over, had to prove very challenging. You're shooting out on the beach for a large portion of it. A couple of your lead actors are buried underground, up to their necks in sand. What was the experience like working out? I believe you were in New Jersey.
We were in New Jersey, around Tom's River. And the same kind of difficulties and concerns for safety that we had for John Amplis, because when you literally bury people in sand, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of time spent in there, a lot of potential for hypothermia. So we had those concerns for the actors primarily. Transporting in and around beaches, little known, but it's there, it's difficult. Sands offer kind of a resistance, and so moving crews and lighting equipment across sands quite often is a difficult issue. So those were the physical concerns. The major concern again was the safety of the actors and their ability to perform under those kind of stresses.
I mean, there's some incredible, the water shots where the water rushes up to them and drowns. It was a wave machine, wasn't it?
We did that back at the studio, yeah. Some of those items, like the immersion in the waters, were done back in the studio. We did some things at the beach where we actually contrived a kind of a bed of sand that we could push water into to give that illusion that they're right at the water's edge.
The one shot that always gets me is that final shot of Ted Danson before he becomes zombified. He's literally underwater.
Oh, yes.
And I don't see how you did that without actually drowning him. How was that accomplished?
Well, we actually did a two-layered effect, so he's actually in a tank. Okay, so at some point, he has to sell the fact that he is below water. Okay, we have the waters in front of him to give that kind of a first dimension of invasion of water, and he's selling it most of himself. And of course, we have backgrounds that are convincing enough. That combined with the scenes that led up to it, which were actually the bibbed sands at the beach themselves, make it work. Yeah.
And then the other portion of the movie takes place on a set. Now, the set was constructed out not far from where we're conducting this interview.
That's correct.
I think it's a Siemens plant now or something.
It's Siemens now. It was once a boys' school, and we, at some point after it went dormant, picked up the lease and worked there approximately almost a year and a half through pre-production and then final shooting.
What was that? How big was this place? I mean, you must have been able
enormous. It was a free-standing strand steel building. The portions we worked in were primarily a kind of gymnasium for the boys, but there were ancillary offices where Mr. Savini and his crew would work. We had room for prop storage and so forth. It was a beautiful facility. There was once thought by Mr. Rubenstein about maybe acquiring the facility and making it the Loyal production offices, but whatever transpired, I'm not quite sure, but it was a perfect facility for the time.
The next story is The Crate, and this one is also a combination of practical location, I believe, at Carnegie Mellon.
Correct.
And then also the set, which is, I want to go into that a little bit because for me it's a seamless effect because you go down one hallway and then all of a sudden when the door opens you're on a set and I can't tell where the
Wonderful.
two begin and end. How difficult is it to blend an existing location with a practical set?
Most of that challenge again comes to Cletus and his boys with set design, set coordination, their art in terms of making that visual transition, and they did a stunning job, stunning job. The rest is left to us in terms of a crew, the visual eye, trying to provide the right kind of lighting and transition from one spot to the next. And most of it, again, is just Cletus' genius. God bless him. May he rest in peace.
Yeah. What about working with three very interesting actors? You had Hal Holbrook and Fritz Weaver, and then Adrienne Barbeau giving this incredibly over-the-top camp performance. What are your memories of working with those three?
Incredibly easy. It seems like the great ones, those who have the abilities, the Harrises, the Holbrooks, the Barbeaus, are there for their task. And there's no pretense whatsoever, and they were a joy to work with. They understood. They seldom wanted stand-ins. They wanted to hit their own marks. They wanted to find their marks. They wanted to help you with the focus pull. Marvelous people. I found out even later on some of my productions that I directed, George Kennedy's, Dorothy Lamar's. I mean,
the real established people who came up in the business, right?
Exactly.
In fact, George, I remember telling me about Hal Holbrook that he couldn't tell that Hal was doing anything at first. It's like, is he? And then he would look at the dailies and see, oh my God, there's this whole performance there. He said, was it hard for you sometimes to wonder? It's like, God, are we getting the footage or not?
No, because I have the strict advantage of being through the lens and watching. Okay, so I have the joy of seeing what we will eventually all see on the screen, and yeah, it was there. The subtlety's there. Difficult to see, as you say, sometimes in person, but the subtlety and the nuance that they all provided was always there. It was my private joy, you know.
Actually, we got to backtrack just for a second. I forgot Leslie Nielsen. You have to tell me about Leslie.
Well,
everyone had a Leslie Nielsen story when I talked to him about it.
He was delightful. I mean, sets get quite tense often. There's a lot of preparation time, a lot of downtime, and he's unique in the fact that he could lighten the mood on set and make it all seem like a lot of fun. He was the jokester. He carried his whoopee cushion with him. During the course of offset interviews with local TV stations, he would often activate his whoopee cushion to indicate a flatulation of some sort and keep a perfectly straight face. And he was a joy. Yeah, he really was.
On the crate, one of the most memorable things about that is Fluffy, the crate creature himself or itself. And this is a good opportunity to talk about Tom Savini and his creations for this, which were different than the ones he had done for you previously on other films, which were gunshot hits, gore effects, that sort of. These were creature effects. What was it like working with Tom on that film, and what did you see about how he worked with you to make these things look real?
I had no sense that he had such mastery over his craft in terms of manipulating, hairs and costuming to that degree. In a sense, this is pre-animatronics too. So he did a lot of costume work which had to be mechanically manipulated by the actor inside the suit and so forth. The claws, the jaws. I just thought he did an incredible job, in performing some of that. And then in turn, he did use some mechanical effects for both with the arms and some of the jaw work and so forth. So it was glorious. I mean, he absolutely emerged as an incredible talent. As you say, his calling card prior to that was the gore and the blood and the trick effects. But this showed a new kind of mastery that he had that no one realized, I don't think.
And then we get to they're creeping up on you, and I'm trying to think of maybe one distinctive element about that one to talk about. I can't imagine what that would be. There's really nothing
incredible
that was
in the regard that there was so many millions of these
roaches.
Damn cockroaches.
Roaches were. Everyone has had. I mean, I could do a whole documentary on just the roaches alone. Everyone has stories about the roaches. What were your memories of these things?
Mine in particular was, we tried to suit up our immediate camera crew because we were oftentimes immersed in these things on the set themselves. Yeah. So we always had our chemical suits, and we would lace up with gaffer's tape around every possible opening. But I remember nonetheless being so concerned about the situation that each night I would go home and literally disrobe in the backyard and let the clothing just hang overnight, because I was so concerned about bringing roaches into the house, roach eggs into the house. My most frightening moment was when I was doing some diopter shots for George, some very, very tight moments.
The macro photography shots?
The macro photography. Yeah. And while I'm working, I noticed in sizing up a shot, I noticed on the cockroach himself other mites. And I said to the entomologist, I said, what's going on? He goes, oh, well, these are just, the roach is the host, and these are living on the host. And I thought, I can't see these, but they're there. So what a freak out.
I was going to ask you specifically about the macro photography, because that had to be just, I mean, you're getting to see stuff you shouldn't see like that.
Exactly.
I mean, there was a lot of shots where the roaches are running towards the camera, and
there's an odd kind of relief when you're looking through a lens, even in terms of high horror and gore and so forth. You can be somewhat objective because you feel, stupidly, you feel a distance which really isn't there, but you somehow imagine you're in a safe zone. You know?
Mm-hmm. E.G. Marshall, that's pretty much just a powerhouse one-person performance from him, and he's amazing in the role, but he had to actually interact with the roaches to a large degree. I mean, there were fake ones sometimes, but he was there for, what was he like with the roaches? Was he able to do it?
Incredible, because unlike us, I mean, the crew who had chemical suits that were gaffered off to protect any openings, E.G. was not. He had his bathrobe, he had his jammies and his slippers, and the wild cockroaches. And on many a cut from George, he's tried to stomp these sons of guns out, but they were all over the place. And he had a few up his leg, up his arms. I mean, he was a trooper. God bless him.
Just kind of discuss the wraparound a little bit, because you're tying these all together, and you're also mixing with animation segments which lead into each of the chapters. How hard was it to shoot those transitions where the animation would dissolve into your photography? Did you have to lock off a shot and then send it over to them? How did that work?
That was the marvel of me shooting a plate, in essence, for Harvey Plastrick, who operated a facility in New York City, who would take my plate and basically combine it and adjust it to a Rick Catazone reference frame of that, and marry the two, and he did an incredible, seamless job.
At the end of the day, when the film was all finished, what did you think of it?
Very, very proud. Very, very proud. And wanting to do more.
And you did.
I did. Anxious to move on to Creepshow 2.
Right.
Creepshow was part of a trilogy with UFD in terms of offering of a 3-picture deal, as they call it. And so we had to give it a beat before we got on to the Creepshow 2. But that's how Night Riders happened, and Creepshow 2, and then of course Day of the Dead.
Mm-hmm. Looking back at Creepshow now, is it one of the highlights of your career? Do you think, is that one of the ones that you think is one of the best films that you worked on?
It is, but I have a love for probably all three. It's hard to, it's like children, which one is better? I mean, they all pose a kind of challenge that I think we met, all a little different in terms of their tone and the overall approach. So yeah, it's a fun one. I guess going back to my youth and my reading as a child, and being influenced by the EC comics, that yeah, it was important for me to do that, as it was Creepshow 2.
Our next interview is with Bruce Allen Miller, who is credited as the property master on Creepshow, but also assisted the production designer Cletus Anderson on many different aspects of this film's art direction. He had also performed similar tasks for Mr. Anderson on George Romero's Night Riders and later on with Day of the Dead, as well as graduating to a highly acclaimed position as a production designer on such films as Creepshow 2, a long association with Wes Craven on films like Scream and Scream 3, as well as Red Eye, and currently can be found working on the series Revenge. So Bruce, if you could talk to me a little bit about when you first hooked up with George Romero and Cletus Anderson and the whole Pittsburgh gang.
I was assisting Cletus on his TV shows and his theater projects in Pittsburgh, and he was George's designer. And so we did Night Riders, I think, which was our first movie we did with George. certainly that I did when I moved to Pittsburgh. And then Creepshow, I believe, was our second movie. And a whole group of people came into the business with George because Creepshow was a big design movie, as opposed to the Living Dead movies, which were a little bit more location driven and certainly were a lower budget than Creepshow was. So we had a very large art department to do all those stories and create those effects.
What was your title on Creepshow? It lists you as property master, but that doesn't exactly tell the whole story.
Because Cletus came out of the theater world, his titles for people were more like theatrical titles, the theater titles. So I know that during prep, I was his assistant and I was the decorator. I did a lot of shopping for the furniture and props. And as I remember now, I believe that he wanted myself and Larry Fulton to be on set because we were his eyes when he couldn't be on set. And so I think I probably got the title as prop master because I was on set as the prop master or set decorator, or on-set dresser, really. And both Larry Fulton and I did those together.
So with Creepshow, I mean, this was sort of a unique situation where you were essentially doing 5 short films, 5 really kind of complete short films, and the wraparound at the same time. So you're essentially doing 6 films in one. What were the challenges in terms of prepping that film? In terms of did you create a lot of props in house? Did you just gather stuff? What was the process for you guys?
I think we gathered props mostly. However, because of the effects, because of the water thing, the water sequence with Ted Danson and the cockroaches, certainly. Can't even remember some of the other effects. We did have to create quite a bit of stuff, and we were all relatively novice to the whole situation. There were some people who came down from New York that did things, like the green department that made the growing greens for the Jordy Verrill sequence. And they had far more experience, but it was a large, once we were in prep for a long time getting stuff ready, and we were working in an old gymnasium, an old private school, I think, gymnasium that was our offices and stage. So we could set up sets, but it was, as I remember, after I went on set, then there was a whole other team under Cletus that was doing all the prep. Sharon Seymour, who's now a big production designer in Hollywood, she took over decorating and buying stuff. I know she did all the Jordy Verrill dressing, and she may have gotten the title as set decorator, actually, I'm not sure. Bob Perzioli created the statue that was in one of the sequences. He was a very talented designer in opera now, and he did all the carving and anything that had to be carved. Ed Fountain did the effects of the waves coming in and smothering Ted Danson, and then he built the tank that we shot in, because we were just creating it from our bootstraps, because we didn't know much, and then we couldn't rent anything. So we did create a lot of stuff, I'll have to admit, now that I think back at it. And it was Cletus heavily designed it. It was a design show which needed, you couldn't run to the store and buy stuff. So it was a fantastic experience, and Cletus being our mentor, he had an eye for all of that, and understood what it needed, and we were exhausted when it was done. Cletus was exhausted, as I remember, when it was all finally done. But it was a great experience, and I hope George was happy with all of it, to tell you the truth.
Since sadly Cletus is no longer with us, can you talk a little bit about working with him? What kind of person was he like to work with? What was the give and take between the two of you?
He was a friend, and you were part of his family, with his daughter and his son and his wife. You really became part of his family. He always had an assistant that was really tied to him all through his design experiences, I think, whether they were a student or they came from the outside or they were a graduate student at Carnegie Mellon. He just enveloped people into his family. He just, dragged them into his family. So it was a friend and family situation. I grew up with the two kids, it seems. I worked in his basement doing all the drawings, building models with Ellen Hopkins, and all of us really came out of Cletus's world, and he was very giving and supportive, and hired us. We were a lot of the people were right out of college, and it was their first big job. And although the pay was not great, being a non-union situation, but it was a long-term employment, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and Cletus made sure it was fun for all of us. And he had an eye, a really good design eye, so that we learned as we were doing it. And he was, when we did things right, he was really supportive and patted us on the back. So, it was a great experience.
The film is interesting from a design standpoint in that there's actually several segments take place in what look to be very practical locations. They're not showy in any way, shape, or form. Like the crate takes place at the university in a house. I mean, there's Father's Day is at a mansion. There's not a lot of sort of calling its attention to itself design elements in those sequences, but then in other sequences, like especially with their creeping up on you with that stark white environment, what ones were the more challenging for you? Was it in terms of creating an entire environment or dressing an existing location?
Actually, the only real location was the mansion for the birthday party sequence. That was a real mansion in Pittsburgh. Everything else was designed and built in that gymnasium. So you started from scratch, and Ed Fountain as the construction coordinator, and Eileen Garrigan as the painter. Part of the whole thing with horror movies, at least from Cletus's standpoint, and I gather from George's standpoint, was that things had to look real because you had to believe as an audience member that you could be in this situation, that you could be one of these people. So there was no attempt to be outrageous or not real in a design standpoint. It needed to look like middle-class America to some extent so that the audience would say, I could be in those shoes and those fears could happen to me, which is, I think, kind of a general a horror movie mantra that your audience needed to think, I'd go down those stairs when the lights are off. You needed to believe that almost, that you could be that person. So Cletus needed to be real, period. And all of our sets were four-wall sets generally. We spent a lot of time prepping them. As I think about the things, the mansion was a real location that we went to, but the house that for the drowning sequence with Ted Danson, that was a house that was built and I thought looked fantastic on film. Jordy Verrill was a cabin built outside, and then the interior was on a stage. In fact, Jordy Verrill was on a hillside underneath the Pittsburgh airport, so that when they lit it for the night sequences, we had trouble with the airplanes apparently because it was the big lights were so bright. All the growing green stuff, doing it backwards. We worked constantly to do that, and it was Cletus that pushed it all. And then he had Larry Fulton is an unbelievable, talented designer, and there were a lot of people who were really very talented, and Cletus was lucky that they were all around him, to tell you the truth.
There were several memorable props in the film, notably, like for example, the crate. Who designed the crate? How was that built? And then didn't you have to build quite a few different ones for different scenes in the movie?
The crate. I remember that I did all the pipes in the basement, now that I think about it. I did all that electrical piping. The crate, I believe, was designed by Tom Savini, I think, because the monster had to work within it, so I think he may have designed it, although Ed Fountain may have built it. And there were 3 or 4 of them, as I remember. There were 3 or 4 of them in that sequence. But where it obviously came from Cletus, and I believe Tom designed it, and I think Ed Fountain built it. Oh, actually, Sharon Seymour had a friend from New York who was a very talented carpenter who's now has passed away also, and he came down and he built all of the crates, now that I remember, because he was extremely finished. Rick, his name is Rick, he passed away in an automobile accident, actually. He was a really talented carpenter, friend of Ed Fountain's, the construction coordinator, and Sharon's, and he built all the crates. And I think there were 3 that are somewhere in somebody's collection now, probably.
One of the most fascinating props, and it was weird that it got used in every single segment, was the ashtray. Can you talk anything about the ashtray and how that ended up in the film?
You know, I can't remember who bought, whether it was myself or Larry or Sharon found the ashtray. And we had an ongoing kind of joke that there was going to be some prop. And I believe in Knight Riders there's some prop that reappeared all the time or tried to reappear all the time. And the ashtray, as I remember, we always tried to have it somewhere on the set. I can't remember who found it. It was a real ashtray, and then we made copies of it, I'm sure, in case we lost the original one. But I don't remember who got it. And it was, now that I think about it, it was a famous little prop that we had.
So it wasn't this was just something that was found.
It was something that was found. It was something that was found. Pittsburgh had an unbelievable source of dressing and stuff at the time. So, you know, we would go to antique stores and yard sales, and, you know, there was things to be found everywhere, little weird things that were perfect.
The final story they're creeping up on you had 2 challenges. One, it's a very stark white set, so you can't bring in just used furniture from other antique stores. Everything had to be custom designed for that. And also, the other problem with that segment, and I imagine there's a couple stories you would have are the roaches. And I'm just curious what your experiences were, not only just dealing with the roaches, but putting that set together, because it looks amazingly expensive, but I have to believe it was anything but.
Well, it was expensive in that it had to be self-contained, because we had live cockroaches, and in order to get them or to get permission to use them, or for our own safety, not that they were going to bite us or hurt us or anything, but the whole set was sealed onto the floor in this gymnasium, and cornices were put on it so that there could be ceilings. We used a lot of Vaseline. Cockroaches have a problem running through Vaseline, so Vaseline was smeared on the tops of the sets. They were high walls. It was all white, and we did have problems with the floor. We used a linoleum flooring that has like round dots on it, and it was a pain to keep clean. Every little bit of dust would catch in the crevices of the round dots. It's a kind of a famous linoleum floor. And we did have problems keeping it clean, and I believe that after the first day of filming, we may have changed the flooring. They stopped filming, and we did something that night, I remember, to fix the floor, because it was kind of a problem. The cockroaches, of course, we did tests with the cockroaches coming down out of the air vents, and we were assured by the bug wranglers, who are kind of famous people from the Museum of Natural History in New York, that they wouldn't hurt you, and they don't carry diseases, and that they would, act on cue. And of course, they flew up the sides of the walls. They were falling on people's hair. And that, it was mostly, you're not going to hurt you, but you just get scared when they fall on you and get down your shirt. So rubber bands around your pants, booties around your shoes, gloves. We had vacuum cleaners that we would suck the cockroaches up when they would try to get away. They make a horrible smell when they're trapped in their cages. They had their own trailer. That had to be, all the tins that they were in had egg crates and banana peels. They love banana peels. Well, you can imagine Vaseline, banana peels, and cockroach droppings have a really weird smell. And it all had to be vented. They had to have air into all these cans, these trash cans. And And then they would just dump thousands of them onto the set, and then we would scoop them up and try to get them back into the trash cans or suck them up with our little vacuum cleaner. So those were the live ones. And then just worrying about them falling into your shirt and getting down into your shirt was, it's kind of spooky. For the big final scene where there were supposed to be thousands in his bedroom cage, essentially, that was my job, actually. I did get to do that, and I built a platform around the dummy. We used, and I don't know who told us this, whether it was Cletus that found this out or somebody else, that cocoa shells from Hershey candy, cocoa shells look very much or have the same color as cockroaches, massive. So we bought bags and bags of cocoa shells, which are often used as landscaping on the ground, and we poured those all over this platform that I built in the bottom of that bedroom cage, and then they dumped all 15,000 cockroaches in for the final sequence where they're overtaking Mr. Marshall. And that was the day before Thanksgiving. And the set was sealed, the ceilings went on the set, and Ed Fountain threw cockroach bombs in the set, and we all walked away for 3 days. So that the cockroaches would die, hopefully, and not be released, because they were large. They came from some island in the Caribbean, and there was some talk and rumors that George had released, these massive cockroaches into the sewers of Pittsburgh, which I don't think is true. I think we did kill them all. But I know we used to rent telephones. I used to rent telephones from the telephone company to use on the set, and when we would return the telephones, they did find cockroaches in the phone, dead cockroaches in the phones. That story apparently is true. And God knows where else the rest of them are. But we did walk away for 3 days and let those bug bombs hopefully put them all to sleep.
What other segments were particularly memorable to film, and do you remember any of the? Did you have any interactions with any of the actors that you recall?
Well, let's see. I remember. Ted Danson had not done Cheers at the point. He was a Carnegie Mellon graduate, I believe, and he had. I remember. George knew him. Cletus knew him, and when he came back to do Creepshow, he had. I remember him talking about the fact that he'd done this pilot. Nobody knew what was gonna happen, and so he was doing this little movie. To fill time, and then of course he became famous, really famous. So I remember him, and Larry Fulton and I were in the tank putting the seaweed around his head for that sequence in our wetsuits. So we got to do that with Ted. Adrienne Barbeau, it was actually a really lovely lady, and she finished collecting her Fiestaware set in Pittsburgh she asked me where to go to buy Fiestaware, and I gave her the list of antique stores that I knew dealt in Fiestaware, and she finished her Fiestaware collection. Let's see, who else was in it? Hal Holbrook, one of the great American actors, just as pleasant as could be. Leslie Nielsen, he had his whoopee cushion, which he became famous for, and that was the first time we ever heard about the whoopee cushion.
Tell me about working with Stephen King on Jordy Verrill.
Let's see. He's a good friend of George's and a friend of Cletus's because of that. I remember that in my job with Cletus, I had to pick him up at the hotel one day and drive him to the set in my little, I think I had a Datsun at the time, and driving through Pittsburgh, we had to stop at a stoplight, and a woman walked across the sidewalk and then did about 3 turns, turned around right in the middle of the street, just spitting, and he stopped and said, "Something's happening." And then she walked on, and I remember that moment. He became really close with our on-set costumer, who has a really thick Pittsburgh accent, and that's where he recorded her and got how to write words, and that's where the book Christine came out of. And also, her family owned a laundromat and did the dry cleaning for all of the movies, and she talked about she was terrified of the mangle. that they used at the as a little girl when they used it in the laundromat, and that became a short story. So he sucked up any information that was interesting and weird, and it would reappear somewhere. The Pittsburgh accent certainly, and the mangle. Pleasant guy, really pleasant guy, fun, into music, and he and George were like best buddies.
What did you think of the movie when you finally saw it? How did you think it turned out?
Well, we're always pleasantly surprised. When you're a novice in the movie business and you do things out of order in little sequences of 20 seconds here, and you do it 20 times. George is famous for doing every angle that he can. Since he comes out of the editing world, he wants ways to cut around. And you look at the takes, we would go to dailies, and George would say, "Oh, the third one's the best one," and I could never tell what's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12. Who knew which one was best? I could never tell. And so you see these little sequences, and you have no idea how it's going to come together. And then with Pat Booba, the editor, and George, in the editing room, we were stunned. It was not that we didn't think it would be good and we weren't proud of what we had done, but you never know how it's going to go together or how the audience is going to react or if it's even going to be scary. And so I'm sure that all of us, including myself, were very happy that it came out so well.
What is, looking back on it now, it's been a little over 30 years since that movie came out now. What importance did that movie have for you in terms of your career and your experience? So looking back on it now, what does it mean to have been a part of that experience?
Well, it's amazing how many people are fans of George Romero, so that when I go to interview and they look at my resume that has those early George Romero movies on it, we always get into discussions about what got them into the movies, what attracted them about horror movies, and so there's always conversation, and it certainly is a door for all of us into other jobs. I think that probably because George is such a professional and Cletus was such a professional, just the quality of work that we got to do. Not that other horror movies didn't try the same way, but there was, George was a master at, we need this to look right, and Cletus was a master at teaching us what that meant. And so certainly I think that probably if I'm I don't think I'm a difficult designer, but the quality that I'm looking for from the people that work for me now, and what I expect of myself, I think that just that level of professionalism, certainly. There was very little drama on the set, and we look for that. We always hear stories about the drama that happens. None of that happened with George or Cletus. It was always very professional and supportive. And it starts from the top. George was a gentleman, and he expected the same from us. So I would think that would be one of the things that I hope I have carried, at least. Probably not as well as him, but I've tried anyway.
So now I am joined by a man who worked with Tom Savini on many of his early efforts in the mid-1980s, including the or early 80s, actually, The Burning and the film we're talking about here, Creepshow. Mr. Daryl Ferrucci, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for calling me, Michael.
Oh, happy to do it. I met you once briefly at a Horror Hound convention in Pittsburgh,
Yes.
and it was interesting to talk to you because a lot of people don't realize that before Tom Savini had his crews on films like Day of the Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, you were his assistant for quite a few of his films in the early 80s. How did you first meet Tom?
Well, I had, fresh out of high school, gone to New York City, to join my dad, who lives there, who has been a gaffer for years. Hooking up with Savini was pure luck. I got a little production assistant work, then my dad got hired on The Burning and brought me along. So we're up there in Buffalo, standing in this sort of what seemed like an abandoned motel conference room that they had taken over, and the producer looks at me and says, "Okay, you're with Savini over there in that corner." You know, and that was it. I went over and introduced myself and said, "Hi, the producer says that I'm your assistant now."
Wow.
It was that simple. Like, so instead of your usual production assistant work, which I'd been doing all summer, like, you know, driving people to the airport, picking stuff up in vans in New York City, you know, scrubbing, whatever,
Right.
I began learning and assisting in the craft of, you know, special effects horror makeup, you know? It was amazing.
Wow.
And we got along great. Tom and I were a great match, and it was a 5-week shoot in Buffalo. And I had planned to spend the summer in New York with my dad and go back to Santa Cruz, California, and go to college. But Savini had another film starting the day after this one totally wrapped. And I was hired. And so now we're getting into October, and we went to Cape May, New Jersey to do, I guess it ended up being called The Prowler.
Right.
The working title was Graduation Day. Yeah, and so from that point on, I mean, we had such a good working relationship. Like, I was in New York with my dad working on, you know, commercials, videos, movies, whatever, now and then. Whenever Tom got a movie, he would call me up and say, "Hey, we got one," and we would go. It was great.
Wow.
We even went to Hong Kong, as you know, I'm sure.
Oh yes, yeah, that's right. You did do a film over there. When did you first hear about Creepshow?
When did I first hear about it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, gee, I don't know. I mean, whenever Tom was informed, you know, I suppose I don't really recall the phone call, you know. I mean, but when I imagine, you know, Romero called Savini up and said, "Hey, we got this film with, you know, Stephen King," and then Tom would have told me. You know, it's just whenever Tom knew, he would have called me and said, "Can you do this?" And I would say, "Yeah, of course." 7 months in the Pittsburgh area. Yeah.
So Creepshow was going to be a little bit different than some of the other films you'd done, which had been primarily slasher type films. This was going to be more of a creature effects type of situation. What were the effects that you were most involved with on Creepshow?
Yes, you're right. It was very different. The you know, early 80s slasher craze, of course, was shifting a bit away from the pure gore, right?
Right.
And so by that time I'd worked on, you know, a few, I don't know, 3 films. I would have to think to remember exactly how many. My role was, first of all, Tom did all of the artistic work, such as sculpting, all the makeup, you know, all the look of and the design of everything, of course, is what Tom did. And so I assisted in all the general invisible ways, such as, you know, helping with making all the castings of the actors, and then what then were foam latex appliances, and, you know, all that routine stuff. But you're right that besides the obvious aesthetic differences and the sort of de-emphasis on gore itself, with the colored lighting and everything, there was the new element of monsters and creatures and stuff. So I helped with a lot of the mechanical inventions that we had to create, like we created Fluffy, for example. Fluffy, the creature in the crate, you know. And, and of course, years ago, fans discovered that on set we were calling him Fluffy. and that I was Fluffy, right? These things were not in the credits, but so like we needed, for example, Tom's vision called for, and George Romero, of course, the creature, to have facial movements, for its eyebrows and cheeks to move, for it to drool a lot. I mean,
Right.
Did you notice? I mean, despite the fact that it had been locked in a crate for God knows how many years, right? It was salivating heavily, right?
Yeah.
Oh, and the drool was just dripping over all those long pointed teeth. So I would help to figure out and then make the ways to make these things happen, such as just, and I'm not trying to claim undue credit either, but we would work together on how to do it. And then while Tom was doing, the major creative work, I would be like, there was a model airplane store not far from the studio, and I visited there many times, buying all these little tiny, like, nuts and bolts and levers and little, like, metal shaped pieces of metal and stuff, and a little welding torch, a teeny tiny brazing torch. And I would build all these little tiny mechanisms, which then were attached to either cable or tubing, depending. Like, his cheeks would puff up, right? Mm-hmm. There were actually condoms in his cheeks attached. Oh, wait. That might be wrong. You know what? I think it was smooth-on rubber bladders that we manufactured. Gosh, things get mixed up after so long,
Sure.
Yeah, it was smooth-on rubber, which is a great material that Tom learned of from his idol Dick Smith. And so then we had air tubing and just little bulbs for somebody to squeeze, and then his eyebrows were controlled by a cable mechanism. So someone would pull a little lever, right? And similarly, the creep is what we called the skeleton creature. I had built those mechanisms which would cause his eyes to move back and forth, and his eyes to open and close, and his hand to raise and his fingers to move. And that was done. The arm and hand were controlled by like bicycle-type cables with levers, and all the eye movements were with radio-controlled model airplane parts and technology. Yeah, so we were just making it up.
So on the crate, you were in terms of Fluffy. I know that Tom has said that a couple people at different points were in the suit in various parts. How much time did you spend actually in the suit and the gear on that?
Well, there were several different days. Again, a quantified answer is difficult to give after so long, but how many shooting days? Maybe 4, but not all day. How many? I don't know. Did I spend like 8 to 10 hours on set in that suit? Maybe. It's kind of a guess. And it was not comfortable, as you can imagine.
No, I would imagine it definitely wasn't. No.
Yeah, there are some great photographs from there was a New York production still photographer. I forget his name right now. There's a great picture of me in the fluffy suit, except I'm holding the head, and I've got my eye area blacked out, like.
Oh yeah.
You must have seen that picture. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom has one similar in his archives as well. Where you look like you've got just like black circles around your eyes.
Yeah. So when you see me in Creepshow as Fluffy, the only part of my actual body that you can see is. You can't see my eyeballs whatsoever, but you can see the like my eyelids and the small area of skin around my eyes, which are made up black, and all the rest is creature costume. Because I had scleral lenses in,
Ugh, and those are always real comfortable.
Yeah. Do your viewers know what those are? Should I explain?
Well, they're full eyeball content. Were they glass back then?
Yes, they were glass, custom made. So they cover the entire whites of my eyes. The sclera. Yeah. It was actually a cool thing because they flew me to a special optometrist in New York City, from Pittsburgh, to have my eyes, to have molds made from my eyeballs with optical alginate. Okay, so I became the subject of the same kind of stuff that Tom and I were doing, right? They were molding my eyeballs to make these custom scleral lenses. I'll tell you though, after even though they were custom made, after 10 minutes with those things on, I start getting a headache for some reason. I don't know what it was. Your eyes need air, or I don't know, but
The as far as some of the other stories in the film, I remember there's some great footage of you. You were in the part of the bodies, the big plant suit at the end of The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill.
I was completely in that suit, except for my head. They had cut a hole in the wall of the set. So I was wearing this pretty huge green plant suit, right?
Right.
And Tom had prepared explosives in the head of the suit. So naturally, my head had to be somewhere else. That's why it was sticking out the
Right,
hole cut
yeah.
in the wall. So I was completely immobilized, right? And but I had practiced, right? And so my job was to kind of struggle to raise the shotgun and point it at my head, at poor Jordy Verrill's head, right? And then Tom was there, of course, and I don't remember how many takes there were. The explosion only went off once, of course, but I don't recall if we got on the first take or not. But in any case, whenever Tom saw a good, gun raising and the barrel pointed in the right place and then just the right timing, he hit the trigger and the head blew up, right? Blowing green crap all over the place. Yeah, so...
Didn't the suit catch fire at one point?
Why, yes, it did catch fire right then. How did you know that?
Oh, that's another Tom talked about that quite a bit, actually.
Yeah, it was pretty funny, and I was not alarmed, of course, because I had no idea that I was on fire until, well after they had extinguished it and helped to extract my head out of the wall. But, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of glue on that suit, including
Right.
spray glue. And, in fact, they had just finished the last touches. They had just brought it down to set when we were ready to go. So, undoubtedly there were some solvents or something left over. I'm now thinking, gosh, should I be saying this? Anyway, I don't think it was a problem. It wasn't a problem for me. The explosion did, catch fire to a little bit of the, area right around there, and then they immediately put the fire out. I mean, when I found out about it, I thought it was funny. I wasn't going to die or be hurt. There's the set
No,
is
no.
filled with, crew members, and everybody is there ready for anything, right? So,
Right.
but after I got pulled out and out of the costume, they let me know that, well, the head of your costume kind of caught on fire a little. In the film, that's actually the second time. And this is even before the Creature in the Crate episode comes on. That's the second time that I get my head blown off with a shotgun. Because I did the stunt, whatever it is, you see it for a third of a second maybe, of in Father's Day, the hunter fiancé guy of Aunt Bedelia, who gets blown
yes,
away in the
Bedelia's
forest.
boyfriend. Yes, that's right.
Right. Yeah. So I did that one,
Oh, so you're the guy who falls into the water?
Yeah, jump, backwards into the stream and splash in the water. Yeah, because, well, I was there, so why not?
Well, that's what I hear from a lot of people I've talked to about, not just Creepshow, but a lot of the films from those days back then, especially in the Pittsburgh area, that if it's just a matter of, hey, we need someone to do this, who'll step in and do the job?
Right, and I was game for it, and I wasn't worried about things like that. I had fun with stuff like that. I was very happy with physical maneuvers, even though I wasn't a trained stunt person. But I mean, in this case, we checked out the situation, saw it, and art department people went all through the stream bed, just making sure there weren't even any rocks or anything sharp in there, and all I had to do was launch myself off the 1-foot high bank and fall in the water. So it was great. It was a lot of fun.
Do you remember what it was like with some of the, because a lot of the actors that you were working with on that film, a lot of them were experienced Hollywood actors, and some of them had to do pretty extensive makeup for some of the scenes in it. What are your memories of some of the actors you worked with, or some of the actresses? Who springs to mind?
The first person in terms of my interactions who comes to mind is Stephen King, because he was around our studio a lot, because him and Tom got along well, and they both love horror and creepy things.
Right.
But we didn't do a whole lot of actual work with him, because there was a whole green stuff department, also. But I was thinking about that when I was recently watching the film again. I didn't have extensive interactions with the actors. Pretty much it was when they came in and we would do this process. And with no exception, they were all really gracious, nice people. I certainly can say that, And they, endured these processes that we had to put them through. First of all, the mold making and all that, and then later on the application of whatever, Tom was gluing to them, right? Like,
right.
Of course, we did Adrienne Barbeau's forehead, right?
Right.
The type of appliance I was talking about for Carrie and I's neck, we made one for Adrienne Barbeau's forehead, which had a little pre-made sort of bullet hole plug, right? And also inside that was tubing. I was standing just outside the frame holding a very large veterinary syringe full of fake blood. And I think maybe the little plug was yanked out by monofilament. I forget exactly how that worked. But anyway, once that happened, I just, pumped the blood so that it trickled out of the suddenly appeared bullet wound. But that's back to the technical, making of it. As far as the interactions, I'm sorry, I don't think I have any very great stories about that because, I don't know, I had to be very focused and busy in assisting Tom in these operations and mixing up the correct materials at the correct time and mold making and all that, And then on set, also, everything's very busy. I'm not really interacting very much with them, except, there's a moment, actually. I do remember what my funniest moment is with Adrienne Barbeau. When we're down in the stairwell, I'm the creature, right? I've got her. She's leaning up against the wall, next to that sort of caged area under the stairs. And this is just so classic. George Romero's direction to me is like what I should do. He says, like, I've got her head in my giant clawed hand, right? And he says, imagine like you're smashing a very ripe cantaloupe against the wall. And that is a vivid image that has stayed with me this whole time. And Adrienne Barbeau's head, of course, did not actually get smashed like a cantaloupe, and she was like game for everything. She was cool. It's funny. She was a real nice lady, and she played such a bitch so well. Oh my God, right? But she was really cool to work with, and she put up with all of the hassle that we had to put her through, with no complaint,
Now, every crew member I've talked to, whether they were involved, even cast members who weren't necessarily involved in that particular story, everyone has stories about the cockroaches.
Oh yeah,
and
sure.
I'm very interested to hear what your experience was with them on that final segment of They're Creeping Up on You.
Oh yeah, terrific, because that provided a lot of enjoyment, I'll tell you. First of all, Some of my main friends were the Green Crew, which is Bill Billowit and Jan, I forget her last name, and the Cockroach people, like Dave and Ray from New
Right.
York. One of them was actually from the Museum of Natural History in New York City. And so they were these roach experts who knew that how to get the roaches. And so I spent quite a bit of time with them and assisted. Our work intersected quite a bit, right? And
Right.
And so there was a production assistant named Debbie Pinthus who
Yes.
became one of the roach wranglers. She's not credited as such, but she kind of lucked out like me because of just her. It wasn't pure luck. She was like good at dealing with the roaches, and there's not a whole lot of people who actually are happy to go get hands-on with like hundreds or thousands of gigantic cockroaches, right?
Yeah,
But,
no, I would
Debbie-
imagine there's very few people that would actually sign up for that.
Right, but she was ballsy. She was totally into it, and so she got such a more interesting job than the average PA. Just as I had before. For example, there were two basic kinds of roaches. They ordered a whole bunch of your average sort of giant American cockroaches from Carolina Biological Supply, right? But then these New York guys, these roach wrangler guys, went to Trinidad,
Right.
where they knew about these certain caves filled with bat guano, which was what the cockroaches lived on. And those were the really big ones. They're like, some were like 3.5 inches long, maybe,
Right.
at least. And so there was a mix of roaches, and then in certain scenes, to make it appear like there are even thousands more, I think they had these like nutshell kind of things. They would build a base. I'm thinking cacao husks, but I'm not sure. It was some kind of cockroach-colored nut husk. So they could build up a kind of heap of that, and then cover it with like buckets full of real roaches and make it look like pounds and pounds and pounds of them. And so Tom and I did have to interface with them, most notably at the end when E.G. Marshall's lying, on the bed, apparently
Right.
dead, and then the blood starts trickling out, right? And then you see his skin like start rumpling, right? And then cockroaches burst out of him and then out of his mouth and all that, right?
Right.
So, of course, we had to cast his head, full head cast, which I also had to do that to be the creature, of course. So Tom had then, made up the fake head, and we had, and chest also. And we had these big, like maybe 3-inch diameter plexiglass tubes, or someone made these gigantic syringes, right? Big plexiglass tubes, which extended from his mouth and chest, like inside this fake dummy, downward under the bed on this set, right? And so actually I jumped in, and Debbie Pinthus and I had were the handles of the respective syringes, which were filled with giant cockroaches. We're like sort of cramped up under the bed, waiting for our cues. Like, okay, push the cockroaches out. So, yeah, we worked together quite well. I think we all had a good time, and those guys really knew how to wrangle their roaches too.
Well, Tom Savini mentioned that he, during that effect, he's outside the room looking in. He didn't seem to enjoy getting anywhere near those things.
I suppose not. Yeah, but he had done what he needed to do. He made the whole head and made sure everything was going to work correctly and did all the makeup and all that.
And he had you to get down there and get dirty with the roaches.
Oh, I didn't mind. That's what I was there for. It was fun, I mean, how often do you get to pump a giant syringe load of cockroaches out of some dead guy's mouth? Not too often.
It doesn't happen very often for me. No.
Yeah. It was a
I can't
unique
think of-
opportunity. I loved it. Yeah, these things are exciting. You got to do it right too. You're waiting for your cue, and
Right,
trying to get
yeah.
a feel for what's going on out there. You can't see it. You're under the bed, and like, okay, how fast do I push? And
Right,
you can
right.
observe actually the transparent tube full of giant cockroaches right in front of my face. Right, I could see them, so I could. Watch how they were moving out and not push so fast I would
boy.
squish them. All that. I mean, it's interesting work,
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's, again, you guys were having to make up stuff. I mean, how do you? It's not like there's a book written on how you can do something like that. You just kind of have to invent it and go along with it, and that's what I think people admire so much about the work you guys did back then.
Yeah, that is exactly right, And that was kind of the type of contribution that I was able to make that helped for Tom and I to work well together. Is I was quite inclined to figure out these little things like, okay, how do we rig up this little mechanical thing and make it work like this, and stuff like that, which Tom needed to make happen. And so if I would do that, then he could focus on the overall artistic work and design of it, and he didn't have
Right.
to actually worry too much about how's that eyebrow going to move. We would, confer and design stuff together, and then I would be, there for hours, drilling and cutting and, sculpting little, like, mechanical stuff, right? And so it was very complementary with our respective, talents and experience. When I was an 18-year-old, I didn't have a lot of experience, and the technology of the day. You're quite right.
Right.
I mean, I mentioned that I would make frequent trips down the road to the store that sold model airplane parts, because that turned out to be a great source of little, those parts I was describing, little levers and tubes and screws and stuff.
Sure.
Yep. If there was no model airplane store, I just would have figured somewhere else to get the stuff I needed, or would have made it out of something. That's just how it was. It was very engaging.
So when you finally saw the finished movie Creepshow, what did you think of how it turned out?
It's always so stunning in so many ways to see the actual film you've worked on. I'm speaking in a general sense right now. I mean, you see it with the music, for example, music and titles. It creates an experience that is so expanded from all of the dailies that you may have watched, during the shooting process. And it's really amazing. And so in this particular case of Creepshow, something really prominent was the transitions between our actual film and the comic book sequences, the comic book animations, and how they blended back and forth between the, quote, real world, which we were creating and capturing on film, right? And then the comic book world, and then the turning of the pages and all that. And I thought it was, I had read the script, of course, but it was really fantastic to see how those transitions worked and how they really integrated this whole main theme of we're going to bring one of these old school horror comics to life in a movie, right? And how they blended back and forth between those two worlds. That was a really, really cool thing. That's the thing that stands out most from seeing the film when it was actually a film,
Right. When did you and Tom stop working together, and what did you go on to do after that?
Well, it was after the film in Hong Kong, which was more and more and more into like creatures and crazy weird effects, and like in that particular film, not really any significant blood or gore that I can recall, which was around 1983, I guess. I mean, the real title of it, although I probably can't pronounce it correctly, is Xiu Shang Papa, which it literally means young man afraid. But yeah, I mean, in English, you don't even want to know the title. It was called "Till Death Do We Scare."
Right.
Right. So that was all very interesting. But now this was at this point, in 1980s, well, whenever it was, it was getting to be around the 4-year point for me in my personal life where I had left Santa Cruz High School in California, right, to go to New York. And my plan was I was going to, hang out with my dad. He'd get me a little film work. We'd spend the summer doing most of that. And then we were going to ride our bicycles from New York to California. But you see, then that's when he got hired for The Burning.
Right.
He brought me along and all of
changed,
that.
yeah.
And then I hooked up with Tom and then went on to Tom's next films. And I was like I was accepted in, college and all, signed up and ready to go. So like 3 or 4 years later, as wonderful as all of that movie business was, I was feeling something's amiss. Like I meant to go to college, and I still want to do that, And I did, for better or for worse. I don't know. I could have remained in New York and gone on to who knows what sort of film industry career, or gone to LA there's so many forks in the road of life, right? But
Right.
my feeling was that I was gonna go to college as I had intended to, And so I arrived in college with, like 4.5 years of film industry experience, and eventually majored in photography, So it was interesting. I was a little older than my classmates, and I had all this crazy experience that they had not had,
Well, yeah, talk about a once-in-a-lifetime experience,
Yeah.
So when you look back at this period of time in your life, this is sort of like the last thing I wanted to ask you. What does it mean to you that these movies have stuck around for as long as they have? That Creepshow and The Burning and The Prawn, all these films are just as popular now as they ever were, and new generations are discovering them. What's your final thoughts on its place in your life and your career?
Oh, it's terrific. It's very gratifying. For example, where we met, the Horror Hound convention a few years ago. That was just, a call out of the blue, inviting me to appear, be a guest, be the man who was Fluffy, and I was pretty amazed, because, I mentioned that, the rings around my eyeballs is the only part of my actual body you could see, right? And yet I had, like, fan after fan coming up and saying, oh my God, you scared me so badly. And I don't really take credit for that, actually. I don't count myself as one of the major creators of the film, right? But I was the guy in the monster suit, right? And people were so stoked to meet me and chat with me a little bit, maybe get a signed picture and take a photograph standing with me. And people would over and over again tell me, like, how terrified that supposedly I had made them, but with love in their eyes, like they were just loving it, So Creepshow is the only film with this particular feature in my life. The other films are less known, Although I do occasionally get contacts from somebody who simply finds me and has something to ask about some film, such as Chud, for example. But
Right.
and not that frequently. But I'm really pleased to sum up that Creepshow endures. Its overall artistic vision of the comic book into a movie, and the fact that it was a moment in the evolution of horror film, right, as we spoke of, kind of away from the ultra explicit gore, So it was made in a transitional time, and it stands now in such a way that actually the guy at my corner store here in the Santa Cruz, when just chatting over the counter one day, somehow it came up, and he was so stunned to find out that I was the creature under the stairs. He gave me some free stuff. I forget what.
Well, Daryl, I want to thank you very much for your time today, and I'm sure fans have really enjoyed getting to hear from you and your time on this movie. And thanks again.
Oh, thank you. It's been a real pleasure, Michael, to revisit these memories and to have an impetus to watch the film again and really enjoy that. So thanks very much.
Wilma, I've had to leave in a hurry because of a call from Dexter Stanley.
The subject of our fourth interview is actor John Amplas, who plays the undead Nathan Grantham in the opening Father's Day segment of the film.
Dexter's wife died.
You became sort of one of many of sort of George Romero's repertory company here in Pittsburgh, where it was like, everyone got together to make a movie, and in Martin, you were the lead. You had a significant little supporting role in Dawn, and then you came in Night Riders as well. When Creepshow came up, was there ever a point where you didn't think you were going to be involved, or you were always going to be in there somewhere?
I didn't know. Actually, I think they had started filming. I think even before I was called. Tom Savini was the one that actually called me. In what year was Creepshow made?
81.
81. In those years, I was probably about 40 pounds lighter than I am now. And Tom called me because he needed someone slight to do this role of Nathan's corpse. And the prosthetics and things that he was going to use needed to look emaciated, so he needed a young, thin person, not necessarily young, but a thin person, so that the suit wouldn't get too filled out, and so he gave me a call, and I went in. He created the prosthetics and the suit in about a week. Me sitting under plaster and stuff like that, and then I had a week of shooting, and I got to go back and kill Ed Harris and Vivica Linfors, and of course Carrie Nye, put her head on a plate, and I had a great time. So I had 2 weeks again on a Romero movie that was pretty much a vacation. I've been fortunate in that regard. So,
just to talk a little bit about the physical demands of that part, because how much could you see in that?
I could see perfectly.
Really?
Yeah. I could see. Well, I didn't have a lot of peripheral, but I could see straight on, and I was able to. It was constructed in such a way that I could open and shut the jaw, so that I could emit sound through it, and. So it was not that cumbersome or difficult, Tom's pretty good at what he does, and he made it fairly simple. The headpiece was exactly that. It was a piece that fit over my entire head. And then the torso was literally a suit jacket filled in that I was able to slip on like a jacket and cover up and have the chest cavity there, and then there were gloves for the hands, and I don't think there were trousers that went along with it, but I don't think I'm ever seen. Yes, I am seen standing at the very end, but most of it was kind of half in and half out of the grave.
Did you, since you're in the suit, and it's dramatically restricting some of your movements in terms of just average movements that you would have as an actor, did you have any background in sort of physical mind anything like that to draw on?
I never did. I mean, I've always been kind of fortunate, you know. I've always had pretty good eye-hand coordination and athletically pretty fair, you know. In fact, I think when I was first introduced to George, I think one of the things that he liked about my work, he saw me in a play, and one of the things he liked about my work was the way I moved, because he thought perhaps that I had dance training, and so I have a fairly good. I was lucky to be born with fairly good coordination, and so I never really had any difficulties in that regard.
You were shooting out at an actual house. Was it Fox Hills?
Mansion,
Out there?
Fox Chapel.
Fox Chapel, that's what it was.
Yeah,
Fox
beautiful.
Chapel. And this is not a set. They just dug a hole in the ground for you.
That's correct.
That had to have been, I mean, and then again, they cover you up. Being claustrophobic myself, I can't imagine ever doing that ever for any reason. How did that, what were your...
I had really no problem with it.
Really?
You know, no, none. I mean, I wasn't underground that long, you know. You know, I would go down. They would do whatever they had to do to create the surface, and you know, on cue, you pop up, and there you are.
Now, did Tom tell you about, or did you know at one point you were going to have worms and stuff crawling in and out of the mask?
Well, yeah.
Now that you had a problem with. That you had that.
I did. I cannot tell a lie. I have to tell the truth. I tried it initially, and they were just on the outside, and then we were going to, and I think it was like a rehearsal, and then we were going to do this very specific shot of the maggots crawling in and out of my mouthpiece, and I chickened out. And I had, we got a female PA who was working on, who was not a chicken, and thankfully was good enough to don the headpiece and do the maggot shot.
So for that one shot, it's not
For the
you.
one shot, it's not me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. I wish I could remember her name. She deserves credit.
So you cry, I mean, and you have to. The first thing you do is you actually have to choke Vivica Lindvers to death. What was your interaction like with? Did you talk to her much?
I love Vivica Lindvers first and foremost. She was an absolutely a delight. One of the best actors I've ever come in contact with, and I knew a little bit about her background, and she's, you know, a European, and very much the lady. But boy, oh boy, she is willing. She was really willing. She just jumped right in there, and we had a good time tussling around a little bit. But she was really a fine lady. I loved working with her.
And then your next actor that you would encounter and have a little incident with is Ed Harris, who you'd worked with on Knight Riders, and at that point, he wasn't Ed Harris yet.
That's right. Right.
What was Ed like to work? I mean, obviously this is going to go back to Knight Riders a little bit, but what was Ed like to work with back then?
Terrific. Yeah, absolute consummate professional. You know, once Ed was on set and ready to go, he has a tendency to really get into himself a little bit, but he has outstanding concentration and focus, more than almost any actor I've ever seen. But along with that, he's also just a regular guy, and funny, and easy to talk to and easy to get along with. So in both instances, working and having some contact with him in Knight Riders, and it was also a pleasure to see him again and work on Creepshow.
Then you go inside the house and encounter some other fine folks. There was a very memorable effect sequence involving Carrie Nye, where you twist her head around.
Yes.
First of all, your memories of, I'd like to know about your memories of Carrie, and then also, that had to be a very, because if I remember the transition in the film correctly, there's a light that goes off, and then you have to turn the head at just the right time. How involved were you with that? Or I take it you were in the suit for that as well.
I was, yes, I was, but the suit really never caused me any problems. It was fairly simple to maneuver in. So the suit never caused an issue. In fact, I don't remember anything really ever causing an issue. And Carrie was, again, she's another one of these great ladies of the American stage, and Dick Cavett's wife, and she's a smoker like I am, so she has that raspy voice. And, you know, she reminded me of, you know, an old favorite aunt or something, you know. I had the fortune, good fortune to work with Carrie. She was on stage in a play that I stage managed at the Pittsburgh Playhouse. In fact, it was shortly after we did Creepshow. She came in, and she was in a play that one of my teachers and mentors wrote, Tom Thomas, called Without Apologies, which is 30 years later, the folks from The Importance of Being Earnest.
Oh, okay.
So they're now in their late middle age, and, you know, Gwendolyn and Cecily are, you know, going through menopause, and the guys are old, and so it was a lot of fun. Once again, you know, getting an opportunity.
She remembered you and everything from
She
the.
did indeed. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
she did indeed. Yeah.
Much different relationship that time, not trying to twist her head off.
A
and
little
kill her.
bit, yeah, a little bit. But everybody, you know, I've never had I can't recall ever, with George or any other film that I've worked on, of having a difficult time with anyone, you know. It's always been a pleasure for me. I've been lucky, maybe.
Nathan Grantham, of course, you're playing. It's sort of strange because you're playing a reanimated version of another
Fella.
act. Yeah, John
Yeah,
Lormer, who played.
Right.
Did you watch his performance at all, or did you have any
No.
idea? Or
No, not really. I mean, I met him very briefly. Again, very nice man. Certainly recognizable to me from years of television and film work. I never really had more contact with him than how you doing, shaking his hand, and that was pretty much it. I figured with under all of this makeup, and more often than not, it's his voiceover, that I was probably free enough to do whatever needed to be done in that suit. And I didn't have to think too much about trying to recreate something that I saw him do. I didn't think the physicality would be comparable.
did you base it off of anything, the walk he had, or was it just sort of something intuitive?
Yeah, mostly intuitive. Mostly intuitive.
And was it ever your voice in the movie?
Once in a while, I mean, I was recorded. Whether or not they used me or used my voice, I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. I know I did try to do an imitation of what I had heard him do, or think I heard him do. And so I did have to be recorded on occasion. But whether or not I was ever really used, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and really listen to the movie again.
What did you think of the film when you saw it?
I thought it was great. I thought it was spectacular. I was sad that I didn't get a chance to meet all these other people. I wanted to meet Ted Danson, and I wanted to meet all these other great, Leslie Nielsen, and damn. But I thought it was terrific because it's a comic book. It's a big comic book. And so I just enjoyed the hell out of it.
Yeah, did you observe? I mean, it must have been challenging for Mike Gornick and the camera crew to set up these really intricate lighting effects and everything. Because at one point in your final scene, one of those scrims goes off behind you.
Yeah.
How long did that take to set up?
Well, those kind of shots are long, you know. But you're used to You know, if you're an actor or if you're a crew person or if you're on set at all, you know that it takes a long time. So you just get used to that process. But yeah, those shots were long in getting set up and making sure everything was happening. It's, you know, but they're worth it. They were worth it.
Then, with working with George on this film, was he any different than he had ever been on these other films? Because this was a bigger
No,
film for him in some
actually,
ways.
I think in many ways I had less contact with George on Creepshow.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, he was there, obviously, but you know, again, George never says much. he never says much. He's just pleasant. He's you finish a take, and he just, yeah, man, great, and then you move on.
Right.
So he's always so easy to handle. He trusts the people that he works with. You know, he really has a trust for the actors, and in that way, that gives us confidence. And that gives us the knowledge that we are allowed to do what we think best. And that's generally the best collaboration. When you get somebody starting to tell you what to do, it gets a little confusing, you know.
Are you surprised that the movie has endured as long as it has? It's been over 30 years now.
I'm surprised about all of the films that I've worked on with George, that they have endured to the extent that they have. I am very happy that they have. I am glad that he was found over the course of time, and has achieved the kind of status, whether it be cult status or not. It's a well-deserved status of a man that loves to make movies and knows how to do it. And so yeah, I'm gratified, more than surprised. I'm really more gratified that all of these films that I was fortunate enough to be a part of are still around, are still finding an audience. It excites me to no end.
Are you surprised that the image of him with it's a T-shirt now, Nathan holding the cake, there's people making their own custom Nathan, the mask has become...
Oh my, yeah, I see dolls all the time. I have a Facebook page, which is primarily for fans. And yeah, I'm seeing all kinds of paraphernalia, little dolls. There's photos right now of somebody that sent me, look what I got, look what I got. And there's a Creepshow fanatic out there. I can't remember the guy's name.
Chris Boyd.
There you have it.
I know Chris very well.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. He's terrific, though. I mean, these guys are and ladies are terrific. No, I love seeing all the paraphernalia. I'm always getting something that says, "Hey, here's a new T-shirt. Hey, look at this doll. Hey." I said, great, have at it.
But I haven't seen a Martin action figure yet.
No, not an action figure. But everything else.
Everything else. But we've got to get a Martin action.
We do.
If you can get a Nathan Grantham, you deserve to have a Martin one.
I think you're absolutely right. A lot of Martin T-shirts.
Yes.
And a lot of different kind of Martin posters. There's a favorite poster of Martin, holding a glass of wine. And I was doing a radio interview, in fact, just last night. And I mentioned it, and I said, I really like that, because I think that's what the film is really about. It's the fine wine of horror. And I love the toast. Here's to the fine wine of horror.
That's great.
Reynolds? White? Talk to me.
I just called to tell you what a monster you are, Mr. Pratt. And how I will rejoice when you're finally dead.
Lots of people are going to rejoice when I'm dead. Who are you?
Lenore Kassenmeyer.
The final interview segment on this commentary is actually one that I recorded back in 2007. The majority of it was not used for the documentary, mostly due to time constraints and the fact that it didn't have a logical place in the documentary itself. That's the problem sometimes when you have 15 to 16 interviews and nearly 20 hours of material and you have a 90-minute runtime. Some things are going to get left out, not because they're not interesting, just because, well, you can't fit everything in there that you'd like to. And this was probably the biggest omission that I regretted. It's with comic book artist and illustrator Bernie Wrightson, who actually illustrated the movie tie-in adaptation of Creepshow that Stephen King wrote. Many of you probably have this, and it's also become a very sought-after collectible over the years. It's a fully illustrated Creepshow adaptation done in the style of a comic book. So here are some extended comments from Bernie Wrightson on the creation of the comic book adaptation, how he got the job working with Stephen King and George Romero, and how he feels about his work in general and the fact that this comic has remained so popular for so many years now.
I got a phone call one night from Stephen King. At first I didn't believe it was Stephen King. I thought it was one of my friends, playing, a really clever joke. Hey Bernie, this is Stephen King. Yeah, sure. And he was calling from Pittsburgh and said, I'm out here with George Romero, and I knew George Romero from Night of the Living Dead, knew of him. And he said, we're making this movie, and it's a movie kind of about EC Comics, and it's called Creepshow. And we would like you to do a comic book tie-in for the movie. And he invited me to Monroeville. I think they were filming in an old high school, in the gymnasium. And he said, "Come on out and visit the set, and we'll show you some of the film that we've shot already, give you an idea of the tone of the film and what we're trying to do with it." So I was living in New York at the time, and drove to Pittsburgh, and spent about a week just hanging out on the set, trying to stay out of the way and not trip over tripods and C-stands. Hung out with Steve. Watched him do some acting on the Jordy Verrill segment. He was just totally there for the movie, and very relaxed, and there to do a good job, but also have fun. I started work on it almost immediately. They didn't have an adaptation script for a comic book, so I got a copy of the screenplay and just broke it down into comic book form. After seeing some of the film they'd already shot, I talked a little bit with George about the pacing of the film and how they were going to do. Okay, this is set up just like an EC comic book, and it's whatever it was, 4 or 5 short stories, and make the comic book like that. I had 3 months to do it. And I might have gone a little bit over, I can't remember, but it was a lot of work in a really short period of time. My ex-wife did all the coloring and all the lettering, and we just worked on it nonstop until it was done. I couldn't spend a lot of time with it. I mean, the essential thing about it was to get it done quickly, because I didn't have that much time, and it had to be full color, finished pages. So I just tried to make it as good as I could in the short time that I had. I liked them all. I think my least favorite just in terms of the work, was the last one, the one with the bugs. It was just a huge, huge pain in the neck drawing all those little cockroaches. I was happy enough, you know. I mean, everybody knew, maybe not everybody, but me. I knew that it was done very, very quickly, and it showed. But I thought, you know, for something done that fast, it still looked pretty good. People love it, and I don't know. I don't think it's because of the comic book itself. I think it's because of the movie, and that the comic book is another incarnation of the movie. And it's just fun. It's just a fun movie, and it's not meant particularly to be scary, and it's not meant particularly to be funny. It's an exercise in storytelling, and everybody involved brings that quality to it.
So, as we bring this commentary to a close, I want to thank everyone for listening, and I especially want to thank Michael Gornick, Bruce Allen Miller, Daryl Ferrucci, and John Amplis for taking the time out of their schedules to share their memories of the making of this movie with me and with you. I also really want to take this opportunity to thank George A. Romero and the rest of the cast and crew of Creepshow for sharing all your memories with me back those many years ago for the documentary. It has been a real honor to document the making and the legacy of this film, and I hope to continue my association with it in the years to come. Who knows what the future has in store? So thank you all for listening, and I will hopefully be talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Come on, come on, come on. What do I pay you for?
Police emergency.
It's about time. What are you people doing down there?
We got problems tonight, fella.
Actually, excuse me, I'm sorry. There is one bit of unfinished business that I need to attend to here. See, back when I did the original DVD of Creepshow, I did the commentary with George Romero and Tom Savini, and before we did the commentary, all three of us decided to point out every single time that the ashtray from Father's Day made an appearance in the movie. Because you see, and many Creepshow fans know this, that the ashtray prop, the one that beams Nathan Grantham over the head and kills him, they reused that ashtray in every single segment of the film. It's there somewhere. Maybe not for very long, just for a couple of quick shots, but they made a point to include it in every single segment of the movie. And George and Tom and I were going to make sure to identify that every single time that it came up on screen. Well, of course, we got distracted with other things, and I think we pointed it out a few times, but not every single time. So, I'm going to take this opportunity to play a little game called Spot the Ashtray. This game is going to point out every single instance where the ashtray can be seen in Creepshow. Alright, starting off with Father's Day. Well, it's pretty obvious where it is in Father's Day. It's the ashtray that hits Nathan over the head. It's a major plot point in the film. There's really no mistaking where you can see it there. You see it several times. There you go. The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. This one was a little tricky. I always thought it was somewhere in Jordy's cabin, but it actually is not. The place that you can see it is actually in the Department of Meteor's fantasy sequence that he has. It's sitting on, I guess you'd call him the Dean of Meteors, sitting on his desk. It's got a little meteor sitting on it, and you only see it for a few seconds, but it's sitting there on his desk. And I only discovered this recently, in the Doctor fantasy where he's going to get his fingers cut off, if you look behind the Doctor on his dresser, you can see just the top of the ashtray sitting on the top of his dresser. You can't see the whole thing, but it's definitely there. But those are the only two instances in Jordy Verrill that I've been able to spot seeing the ashtray. It may still be in the cabin somewhere, but I haven't been able to spot it. And something to tide you over, it's sitting on Richard's nightstand right next to his bed. You see it about, I think, twice, but the best time to notice it is when he goes for his gun. You'll see it sitting right there on top of the nightstand. In the crate, You get a clear shot of it on Henry's desk as he's writing out the note to Wilma, which is going to get her to go out to the university where she eventually gets eaten by Fluffy. But you can see it very clearly. It's actually a pretty long shot as he's writing out the note. It's right there behind the note. They're creeping up on you. It's actually very easy to spot, and you see it right at the beginning when it's right in Pratt's bathroom, sitting on his sink. It's a soap dish. It stands out pretty easily because everything else in there is white, and it's the only thing that is not, pretty much. So it stands out real easy, and it's right there at the beginning of the segment, so it's pretty hard to miss. The wraparound, now in the wraparound segment, it's not in the beginning of the movie that I can tell, but you do see it on Billy's desk at the end of the movie when he's puncturing the voodoo doll. There's a shot of the pin going into the voodoo doll, and on his desk is the ashtray holding what looks to be some rubber bands and some various junk, and it's sitting right next to a trophy on his desk. So it is there in the wraparound as well. So that, as far as I can tell, is every single instance of that ashtray showing up in Creepshow. Now, maybe it's in some other places I didn't catch. It's very possible. But that's every place that I could spot it. So if you've seen it somewhere else, let me know. And next time I do a commentary in another 7 or 8 years for this movie, I'll update the Spot the Ashtray game at that time. So just wanted to throw this little bit in there for all of you Creepshow fans at home, and that'll do it. Thanks very much.
Chew your food before you swallow! That? Comic book. What? It's a comic book. What? It's a comic book! It's a comic book! My kids love these things. I love them too. Hey, look. You can send away for all this stuff here. Look. X-ray glasses. Nah, they don't work. They make your eyes black. You look in it, it's a gag, you know? Look. An authentic voodoo doll. Somebody already sent for it. Yeah, we can't get that. How about this? Tired of getting sand kicked in your face?
Where's Billy?
He'll be down in a minute. I know he's up.
Billy!
Stan, are you all right?
I didn't get much sleep last night.
Storm?
Oh, it's this goddamn stiff neck. I can barely move my head.
You must have strained it.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Ow!
Well, you poor old bear. You want me to get some Bengay?
No.
I'll teach you to throw away my comic books. Ready for another shot, Dad?